French President Macron is in Moscow for talks with Vladimir Putin in the latest diplomatic efforts to find a solution to the Ukrainian crisis. He'll then fly on to Kiev for talks with Ukrainian leaders. The Canadian capital, Ottawa, has declared a state of emergency in response to more than a week of protests by truckers against COVID restrictions. The mayor said the protests posed a threat to the safety of residents. Up to 8 million people are at risk of starvation in Afghanistan. The former head of Britain's Armed Forces, General Sir David Richards, has told BBC Panorama that it's time to work with the country's new Taliban leaders. Australia has announced the reopening of its borders to tourists and other visa holders for the first time in nearly 2 years to those who are double vaccinated against COVID.
In Poland, U.S. troops continue to arrive in support of NATO allies in Eastern Europe as Russia increases its forces on the border with Ukraine. International Olympic Committee chief Thomas Bach says he met with Chinese tennis player Peng Shuai in Beijing. Peng disappeared after accusing a Chinese official of sexual wrongdoing. A United Nations report says North Korea supports its banned nuclear and missile programs partly through cyber attacks and cryptocurrencies. And in Mexico, the military and police clear a camp of 381 migrants in Tijuana near the U.S. border.
European leaders are launching diplomatic efforts on two fronts to avoid a military conflict in Ukraine. French President Emmanuel Macron is set to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow on Monday. And in Washington, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will sit down for talks with U.S. President Joe Biden. Scholz told the Washington Post ahead of the meeting there will be a very high price if Russian troops enter Ukraine. But he added, "We're working very hard to use all channels of talks that we have now." Scholz also hinted at the possibility of Germany halting the Nord Stream 2 pipeline project to transport natural gas from Russia in the event of an invasion of Ukraine. He said, in a situation like this, all options are on the table, and added, "Our answer will be united and decisive." Washington is increasingly wary of Russian military action in Ukraine. White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said on Sunday, Moscow could launch an invasion during the ongoing Beijing Olympics. Japan's Prime Minister Kishida Fumio says he wants to speed up the nation's coronavirus booster shot rollout. Less than 6% of the population has received a third vaccine dose, despite his declaration a booster shot drive would be a key feature of the effort to combat COVID-19.
We are set to ramp up the vaccination rate to 1 million shots a day later this month. The government will work as one to allow everyone who wishes to get vaccinated to do so as soon as possible.
That means health authorities across the country must double the current booster program. Earlier on Monday, the Self-Defense Forces started giving booster shots at a large-scale center in the western city of Osaka. Another venue in Tokyo began operating last month. The Prime Minister also seeks to promote vaccinations among teachers and nursery school staff. The virus has been spreading at schools and daycare facilities. And the situation is even more dire at facilities that provide care for the elderly. At this nursing home in Tokyo, 12 residents and 10 staff members have been infected with the coronavirus. That leaves fewer personnel to see residents, many of whom suffer from dementia. Doctors say the now dominant Omicron variant brings on throat inflammation that quickly leads to dehydration in elderly patients. 2 of the residents here have died, one while waiting to be taken to hospital in an ambulance.
Nursing care facilities are facing more confusion than during the outbreak last summer. The problem is the overwhelming number of patients. Caregivers are hanging on and trying to provide as much treatment as they cannot find hospitals to send ill residents to.
Japan recorded more than 68,000 coronavirus cases on Monday. That's 5,000 up from the figure a week earlier. The rate of infection has slowed, but has not yet begun to decline. And the Omicron surge is also crippling the medical system in neighboring South Korea. Health authorities in Seoul say they're now stopping daily checkup calls for low-risk patients at home to focus on more vulnerable patients.
We will concentrate on making our care of high-risk groups faster and more efficient. This is in line with the characteristics of the Omicron variant, which is very infectious but has a low risk of causing serious symptoms.
The government's new home care plan will place patients aged 60 or over and those with underlying conditions in the high-risk group. This means they'll be monitored by health authorities and provided with fever reducers and at-home care kits. But younger at-home patients will now have to monitor their conditions by themselves and contact the hospital if necessary. South Korea has seen more than 35,000 daily cases for 3 straight days. Officials say the number could reach up to 170,000 later this month. Next, Canadian officials are struggling to control protests that have paralyzed the country's capital for the past 10 days. Truck drivers and their supporters are blocking streets and demanding an end to vaccine mandates. Demonstrators have been rallying in Ottawa since late January. The protest was originally organized to oppose the government's vaccine requirement for Canadian truckers who cross the U.S. border. Police say hundreds of protesters gathered around the country's parliament buildings over the weekend. They blocked streets with about 500 trucks. They say they will not back down until the government ends the public health measures. But Ottawa's mayor says the protests are a threat to people's safety. He's declared a state of emergency and is asking other levels of government for support. But there are few signs that it'll disperse. Similar protests have spread to Canada's largest city of Toronto and other parts of the country. Canadians are largely in favor of vaccines, with almost 80% of the population fully vaccinated. Australia is set to reopen to fully vaccinated tourists from across the globe for the first time in nearly 2 years. The country has imposed some of the world's toughest border controls since March 2020. The reopening is expected to boost the economy and tourism.
If you're double vaccinated, we look forward to welcoming you back to Australia. And I know the tourism industry will be looking forward to that.
The reopening takes effect on February 21st. Almost all states in the country have scrapped isolation requirements for arriving people who are fully inoculated. But Morrison stressed visitors need to provide proof of vaccination. He apparently had in mind the recent saga involving tennis star Novak Djokovic. Djokovic was denied entry following a dispute over his vaccination status.
I think events earlier in the year should have sent a very clear message, I think, to every around the world that that is the requirement to enter into Australia.
Australia has gradually eased border restrictions since late last year. In December, it allowed entry of fully jabbed travelers with visas from Japan and South Korea. Now, neighboring New Zealand also announced last week it'll resume accepting visitors who don't need entry visas by July. The country has banned entry of all foreigners in principle since 2020. One of the most decorated Winter Olympians of all time has written another chapter in her glittering career. Dutch speed skater Irene Wust has won a gold medal for the 5th Games in a row. Wust finished the women's 1,500-meter event with an Olympic record time. The 35-year-old has now won 3 golds in the event, following victories in 2010 and 2018. She has 12 total medals, making her the most successful speed skater of all time. She said after the race, this was the hardest gold of her Olympic career. Pyeongchang silver medalist Takagi Miho of Japan was the favorite heading in. She holds the world record time and has won all 3 World Cup races in the event she's participated in this season. But she once again finished a close second to Wust. And another legend of the sport also stole the show over on the short track. Italy's Arianna Fontana won gold in the women's 500-meter race, bringing her Olympic medal total to 10. The 31-year-old also took silver in Saturday's mixed team relay. Canadian snowboarder Max Perot has completed his comeback from cancer in style, winning gold in the men's slopestyle final. Perot laid down the gauntlet with a dominant performance on his second run, cleanly landing a series of difficult triple cork jumps. He recorded a score of 90.96, finishing over 2 points ahead of his closest competitor. He won silver in the event at the 2018 Games, but was diagnosed with Hodgkin lymphoma later that year and missed 6 months of action to undergo chemotherapy treatments. Perot returned to competition at the 2019 X Games, winning the big air event. He said after Monday's final, his battle with cancer had made him mentally stronger, and he was extremely proud of winning the gold. Hometown hero Su Yiming took silver, becoming the first male Chinese snowboarder to win an Olympic medal. The 17-year-old Phenom burst onto the world stage by winning a World Cup event last year. Well, athletes at the Games are braving not just the icy weather, but also ongoing frosty relations between the United States and China. Curlers from those nations warmed things up a little with an unexpected exchange. The teams faced off in the mixed doubles round robin on Saturday, with the U.S. beating China 7-5. After the match, China's Fan Su-yan told the U.S. pair it was a good game and wished them luck in their next outing. She and teammate Ling Tzu then handed their opponents a set of pin badges. Americans Christopher Pleiss and Vicky Persinger later wrote on Twitter they were honored to receive the gift, describing it as a wonderful display of sportsmanship. People in India are mourning the death of legendary Bollywood singer Lata Mangeshkar, who died on Sunday. Famously called the Melody Queen of India, Mangeshkar enthralled millions with her music. She died of multi-organ failure at a hospital in Mumbai after contracting COVID-19 last month. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi attended Mangeshkar's state funeral on Sunday and led the country in paying tribute to the singer. The government declared 2 days of national mourning. Imran Khan, who's the Prime Minister of India's arch-rival, Pakistan, was among those offering condolences. Khan wrote on Twitter, "The subcontinent has lost one of the truly great singers the world has known." Mangeshkar was a so-called playback singer, lending her voice to more than 25,000 songs in Bollywood movies in Hindi and other languages. Her melodies moved generations following India's independence. Lata Mangeshkar was 92. Shifting now to the weather, people in the eastern United States are bundling up under cold and stormy conditions, while those in the west are seeing summer-like temperatures. Our meteorologist John Thuneau has the details in our World Weather Report.
Hello, we have a couple of low-pressure areas toward the eastern side of the United States, and as those two interact with each other, we're going to be talking about some snowy weather up toward the north and east and a little bit of wetness along the southern areas into the eastern coastline of the United States. Now, back toward the west, lots of high pressure in place, and we have one particularly large one that's going to be pushing toward the east. So by the time we go later on this week, the Santa Ana winds are expected to pick up down towards Southern California. It's going to be hot. We're talking about highs into the 30s by the time we go into the second half of the week. So be on the lookout for that. Relatively dry in the area, but again, seeing those couple of lows rolling along the eastern seaboard, bringing some rain and even some snow into places like New York as we go into Tuesday. 26 for the high in Los Angeles as we go through the day with some showers up to the north into Vancouver. Over into Europe, we've been watching one low bringing plenty of snow to the central portions of the continent, now moving down to the Balkan Peninsula, and that's going to keep things relatively active as we go into Tuesday. Up toward the north, another system developing with some strong winds and a bit of instability, so looking at the possibility of thunderstorms into the northern areas of Europe as we head toward Tuesday. Looking at that rain with some stronger winds associated with that. Snow, possible, into the high elevations into the Balkan Peninsula, but also looking at some thunderstorms into places like Athens with a high of 11. Berlin also looking at thunderstorms on Tuesday with a high of 9. Showers into Stockholm and Warsaw, and again looking at some windy weather as well. We've been monitoring the dry pattern across Western Australia, and we're talking about some real wildfire problems there. And looking at the later frames of the satellite, it looks like the central areas might be seeing some rain, thunderstorms, and instability, but you know what? We need more of it down toward the south. And it's not happening. It's going to be relatively dry into places like Perth, and so that's going to continue to prolong the issue that's going to be in the area. 27 the high in Perth, Port Hedland at 30 with some thunderstorms. Looking at some warm weather to Adelaide as well with thunderstorms, a high of 33 on Tuesday. Hope you have a good day wherever you are.
Let's bring in ABC News national security and defense analyst Mick Mulroy for more on this. Mick, thanks for being here. How provocative are these war games that Russia is staging with its allies in Belarus?
So very provocative, Diane. I think, as Terry reported, we're about 70% to the point of having enough forces for a full-on invasion. They are looking at opening multiple points and multiple avenues of approach, which includes now amphibious assaults, which would cause even more dilemma for the Ukrainians in trying to oppose the invasion. I think we're at a very dangerous stage with getting close to a military capability of readiness to invade. We have 83 what they call battalion tactical groups. That's how Russia fights, available now, and 14 on the way. So militarily, they're almost ready. Whether they're politically ready is another question.
So based on what you've seen in terms of the troops and the equipment that are staged on the border, what do you think a potential Russian invasion could look like?
So I think they're looking at either a limited invasion, largely into the Russian-speaking eastern side of the country, which would have a lot of consequences, negative consequences to both sides, or a full-scale invasion, which would have massive consequences. As the Intelligence Committee reported this week, that could include 50,000 civilian casualties, 25,000 Ukrainian military casualties, and up to 5 million refugees pouring into neighboring countries, including NATO countries. So this could be extensive. It could cause an extensive amount of human deaths, and the occupation would be incredibly intense, as Ukrainians are very much ready to fight, and the United States has provided them a lot of the capabilities to fight, both to oppose an invasion and to create a significant insurgency after one occurs.
Now, how much of a deterrent are the U.S. troops that are being deployed to neighboring countries?
So I think we should look at that primarily to bolster the security of our NATO allies. However, if you look at after the occupation, when the insurgency starts, in order for insurgencies to be successful, they have to have a safe haven. The most likely safe haven for Ukrainians is going to be in Poland. They have a large ethnic Ukrainian population, and of course, all the refugees from Ukraine which will be there, which will allow them to hide. So you'll have an insurgency out of a NATO country fighting back into their own country. This, as the Ukrainian president has pointed out, will rapidly turn into a war that is beyond the borders of Ukraine and includes NATO countries. So having the U.S. forces there bolsters their security and prepares for this eventuality in the spillover of this war in Ukraine should it occur. We should all hope that it does not. We should all hope that the diplomatic efforts today happening in multiple capitals are successful.
And there are several high-level diplomatic meetings going on today, including a one-on-one with Vladimir Putin and French President Emmanuel Macron. So how much longer do you think this whole thing can go on for before we either see a resolution or an invasion?
So I think this is essentially a crisis of Russia's own making, and it is a crisis they could end. If they think that this somehow bolsters their standing on the world stage, to have everybody talking about them, having multiple phone calls with the U.S. presidents and having visits to Moscow, then perhaps this keeps going. It does have dire consequences for Russia should they decide to actually invade. They will be successful probably in their occupation, but the intensity of the insurgency I cannot overstate. And the fact that this could spill over could cause great economic hardship to Russia, isolation, and just further damage to the Russian reputation. So let's hope that we can find another way out of this other than an actual conflict.
All right, Mick Mulroy, always great to have your analysis, Mick. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today is National Black HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, which started as a grassroots movement to raise awareness of prevention, care, and treatment options in communities of color. Now, while anyone can get HIV, Black Americans are disproportionately affected. The CDC reports that while Black people account for 13% of the U.S. population, they made up 40% of people with HIV in 2019. On average, 1 in 16 Black men and 1 in 30 Black women will be diagnosed with HIV at some point in their lifetime. So let's bring in founder of the Black AIDS Institute, Phil Wilson, for more on this. Phil, thanks for being here. You know, CDC data shows that over the past decade, new infections have dropped among white, gay, and bisexual men, but remained flat among those who are Black, Hispanic, or Latino. Why are we seeing these higher rates to begin with? And then why aren't we seeing these numbers come down in these communities?
Well, thank you for having me, Diane. And, you know, the CDC recently released a report showing that Black people are disproportionately impacted by HIV on every level. We get infected at higher rates, as you just reported. We get sicker faster, we die faster. Interesting, you know, that's a report that has been released every year for the last 40 years. Now, so Black people have been disproportionately impacted by HIV since the beginning of the epidemic. It's kind of like Groundhog Day every February where we release this information. There are a number of fundamental issues that continue to exist. Now, high rates of poverty, now housing instability, the issue around discrimination, and a distrust of both the healthcare system and systems in general in the United States as Black people feel mistreated and facing all sorts of challenges.
Now, throughout the pandemic, we've heard a lot about the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. Is there a common thread here?
Yes, I think that there certainly is a common thread. You know, one would have hoped that we would have learned lessons from HIV and AIDS, and clearly we have, but we have not learned them well enough. For many of us in Black communities, we feel like it's deja vu. We feel like, you know, the same processes that we experienced in the HIV pandemic, we're experiencing in COVID-19. And now we're facing the dual epidemics. You know, what we see is that Black people who are living with HIV, or people in general living with HIV disproportionately, those people are Black, also face higher incidences of COVID-19. The severity of the disease with COVID-19 is greater for people who are living with HIV as well.
And so is there sort of one key area that needs to be focused on, you know, access to medication and healthcare, for example? What do you think is sort of one key place that communities and that leaders can focus on to try to at least get this going in the right direction?
Well, I think that we've been plagued with kind of fits and starts. And so if we want to have success in addressing the disproportionate impact that HIV and AIDS and now COVID-19 is having on Black communities, we have to have an all-out effort that is sustained and consistent over time. And that's not happened. No, we launch initiatives, and then those initiatives drop off, and then we launch new initiatives, and then those initiatives drop off. And so if we want to be serious about fighting both HIV and COVID-19 in Black communities, number one, we have to have an all-out effort. We have to be consistent about that effort. We have to engage the entirety of Black communities, inclusive of the LGBTQI communities, but inclusive of traditional institutions as well. We need to reinvigorate our energy to remind people, although we have had success with HIV and AIDS, the pandemic is not over. Now is not the time to lift our foot off the gas. Quite frankly, now is the time to press our foot onto the gas in a wholehearted, holistic manner.
And so what should people do to stay safe?
Well, number one, there are obviously advances we've made in treatment and prevention. Today, if you're diagnosed with HIV, science will allow you to live, quite frankly, a normal lifespan. Now, today, if you're diagnosed with HIV, there are treatments that actually can stop the progress of the disease in your body. On the prevention side, we have tools like U equals U, which means that if you're undetectable, you cannot transmit the virus. So both the treatment is a prevention tool so that we don't transmit the virus to others. We also have PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis, which allows people to protect themselves from acquisition of the disease. Now, we also need to face the issues around community activity and access to the disease, because although these treatments are available, the uptake is not the same in Black and brown and other people of color communities and in poor communities as they are in wealthy communities and white communities.
All right, Phil Wilson, great to have you, Phil. Thank you.
Thank you.
Russia moving forces closer to the border. President Biden's national security advisor warning that Vladimir Putin is in a position to act aggressively against Ukraine at any time. But high-level diplomacy is also underway. French President Emmanuel Macron heading to Moscow to meet with Putin, hoping to avoid a new European war. Senior national correspondent Terry Moran has the latest from Ukraine.
Overnight, French President Emmanuel Macron heading to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin as Russia mobilizes more troops even closer to Ukraine's border. Macron telling reporters before leaving Paris it's essential to stop the situation deteriorating. U.S. officials estimate that Russia now has in place 70% of the forces needed for a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Satellite images show Moscow's military massing in neighboring Belarus. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan warning that there is a, quote, very distinct possibility that Putin will order an attack on Ukraine.
It could take a number of different forms. It could happen as soon as tomorrow, or it could take some weeks yet. He has put himself in a position with military deployments to be able to act aggressively against Ukraine at any time now.
But intelligence agencies in the U.S. and NATO allies assess that Putin has not made a final decision on an invasion, and Russia denies any intention to attack. The Russian military released video showing drills alongside troops from Belarus, which they say are part of scheduled war games, including tanks and heavy mobile missile launchers, and even long-range nuclear-capable bombers flying over Belarus. And in the Black Sea, Russia has up to 30 ships at the ready, including 5 amphibious assault ships that could be used for beach landing. For years, Vladimir Putin has poured money into the Russian military, which was once crumbling, seeking to reassert Russian dominance in the region.
This is a military that's backed by a lot of firepower, a lot of air power, naval power. The Russian Navy is gathering in the Mediterranean. It's very different from sort of the past remembrances of poor Russian military performance in the 90s.
Over the weekend, U.S. troops arrived in Eastern Europe to reinforce NATO, and more U.S. military equipment arrived in Ukraine as the window for diplomacy narrows.
And Terry is joining me now live from Kyiv with more. Terry, it appears Russia is entering a final phase here if it intends to launch a major attack. What can you tell us?
It does, Kiri. It certainly looks like Vladimir Putin has ordered his military to put all the pieces in place for a variety of options, ranging from just intimidation to get what he wants diplomatically to a full-scale invasion. He will decide at some point. What you can see today is the intensity of both the diplomatic and military activity is accelerating right now, with Macron in the Kremlin as we speak, trying to find some way out. He has said that Russia has legitimate security concerns, and he's also said the situation must be stopped from deteriorating any further. So he is trying to play the broker's role there. But Russia continues to build up forces, adding troops and forces in neighboring Belarus, surrounding Ukraine. At sea, in the Black Sea, 30 ships, including 5 amphibious warships, as I mentioned, ready to pursue action from that front. And here in Ukraine, you get the sense that while people do not share the same dire assessment that the Pentagon has, that Putin could invade at any time, there is a growing sense. This is not the usual Russian shenanigans or worse. Remember, they have lived with Russian aggression in the east of their country for years now. 14,000 people have been killed in the fighting in eastern Ukraine against Russian-backed separatists. They know that one way or another, Vladimir Putin clearly wants this to be a decisive moment to get what he wants. The problem? Getting what he wants in any way, whether Macron can find a deal or Biden or anyone, getting what he wants requires some kind of sacrifice of Ukrainian sovereignty. Either land in eastern Ukraine or they'll never join NATO. Their freedom of choice will be limited. And that's something I think there would be a widespread resentment of and opposition if their government went down that path.
So how could President Macron impact this, as you said, broker role that he is playing now? What is it that he could say? What could he do to impact these talks? And of course, Putin.
Well, the first thing is Macron has to gain the confidence of Putin, and it does seem like he's got that. Putin apparently called him a serious interlocutor, somebody who will listen. That's partly because Macron begins from a position of respect with Vladimir Putin. He says, I get it. He says there are legitimate Russian security concerns, that the expansion of NATO eastward really unsettled certainly Vladimir Putin's sense of Russia's security needs and strategic interests. And so perhaps there's something around that that could be done, a recognition by NATO that while Ukraine has freedom of choice, there's no prospect of Ukraine joining NATO in the near future. But they have to be very careful because President Biden is determined that there will be no deal with Putin that recognizes the old Iron Curtain, that recognizes there's a sphere of Russian influence that the people, the 100 million people who live in what used to be behind the Iron Curtain, these free nations now of Ukraine and Poland and the Baltic countries and Romania and all the rest, that they will not have their freedom of movement, their security interests traded in order to keep the peace with Putin. So it's a hard thing for Macron to do. And as I say, the people here, people don't remember that in 1991, Ukrainians voted by a margin of 9-1 to get out of the Soviet Union. They've been ruled by Moscow. They don't want to go back.
Meanwhile, more U.S. assets coming into the region. Terry Moran in Ukraine for us. Terry, we're going to talk a lot today. Appreciate it. And ABC News contributor Elizabeth Newman now, former Homeland Security official under the Trump administration. So, Elizabeth, let's talk more about French President Macron here, saying that Russia's aim today is not Ukraine, but rather clarification of the rules of how Moscow lives with NATO and the EU. What exactly does he mean by that?
I think Macron is hoping, and this is not a bad thing to attempt, but hoping to find some diplomatic wiggle room where everybody else has failed. There's also a bit of probably European pride that they're closest to Russia. Perhaps they can find an agreement in a way that the U.S. has been unable to. After all, the U.S. and Russia are, harking back to the Cold War days, the arch enemies, and maybe you can find moderation with the Europeans brokering some sort of diplomatic agreement. But I don't have too much hope coming out of it. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be attempted. Of course, diplomacy should always be attempted if we can find a way out of this escalating situation. That is clearly the preferred solution. I just don't think it's very likely that Putin is going to back down from his demands, which heretofore NATO and particularly the U.S. have said are not things that we're willing to compromise.
So, on top of what you just said, analysts are also saying that Russia's troop buildup is 70% complete, and an invasion could come at any time. What's your gut?
Well, we know that they are planning on doing exercises later this week, starting on the 10th, for at least a week, and that gives Putin the excuse to move the military personnel that are lacking. When they look at that 70% estimate, they're looking at equipment and trucks, transport. Those items are in place. What's missing are the numbers of personnel to operate the equipment. With this exercise in Belarus, we're hearing through social media, we're hearing through other open source analysis that there are troops moving in. Of course, Russia is saying it's because of their exercise, but all of the elements will be there here in the next 2 weeks. And while everybody is very clear that we don't have any intelligence that Putin has made a decision yet, he will have all of the resources there. So maybe, as Terry said, maybe this is just for intimidation purposes, and hoping that the West will break and concede to some of his demands. Or maybe he very much intends to go in and take over certain parts of Ukraine and try to rebuild the glory days of the USSR. It's kind of anybody's guess. Either way you ask my gut, it's very concerning. This is not a person that acts within the bounds of the rule of law or diplomatic norms. He is a bully, and that means that he can be unpredictable, and we shouldn't assume that it's just a bluff. We have to be prepared that he is willing to actually use the buildup that he has put in place.
And finally, as someone who was a Homeland Security official in the past administration, as you look to what's happening today, these negotiations that are going to take place, what would be a promising sign to you? What's something you would need to hear where you could sit back and go, okay, it looks like this is actually de-escalating now?
I would want to see actual troops, equipment start to move out of Belarus, out of the other border areas in Russia that border with Ukraine. I would want to see not just a little bit, but a lot. And I don't know that we're going to see that, especially with the planned exercise. Perhaps they could cancel the exercise. That would be a good sign. But even with that, you know, Putin is just not not somebody that the West should trust very easily. He, you know, his background as a KGB person is he's trained to know how to use deception, trained to know how to use disinformation to his advantage. So there's just not a lot that I would trust. I would. It will take several months before I think. And him moving people out of harm's way before we would start to think that the situation has resolved.
All right, stay tuned. ABC News security contributor Elizabeth Newman. Always appreciate conversations with you, Elizabeth. Thank you so much.
I do want to turn now to demonstrations over the police shooting death of 22-year-old Amir Locke, killed when a SWAT team executing a no-knock warrant burst into a Minneapolis apartment. Locke's parents are now demanding justice as police release disturbing body cam video from the shooting. Our Alex Perez is in Minneapolis for us. Alex, good morning to you.
Hey, good morning, TJ. Prosecutors are still working to determine if the officer who fired his weapon could face charges. Over the weekend here, protesters taking to the streets. Demonstrators demanding answers over the weekend in Minneapolis about the police killing of 22-year-old Amir Locke. Police body cam video captures officers as they use a key to quietly enter this apartment and then announce themselves. Locke appears to be asleep under a blanket and startled awake. Police say he had a gun in his hand when an officer opened fire within 9 seconds of entering, killing Locke. We've paused a difficult-to-watch video. Locke's heartbroken parents talking to ABC News overnight.
He didn't have an intent to hurt those officers. He wasn't even awake.
That he was my second born. He was a beautiful baby boy. He was very respectful and caring. Everybody that came in contact with him loved him.
Loved ones say Locke legally owned the gun seen in his hand and was a responsible owner.
He researched everything, very intelligent on Amir's part before he even purchased the kind of gun that he wanted. And he made sure that it was licensed with the permit.
The officers were carrying out a no-knock warrant for a homicide investigation in St. Paul, but Locke, who does not live in the apartment, was not listed on that warrant. Many jurisdictions across the country have banned no-knock warrants, but the attorney for the family of Amir Locke believes the practice must be halted nationwide.
No-knock warrants have deadly consequences.
The officer who fired his weapon has been identified as Mark Hanneman. He's been placed on paid administrative leave. Locke's family now calling for his dismissal.
After seeing that video of my son being executed because he was sleeping on a couch at a family member's house, at this time, I would like to see him fired.
And St. Paul police say it was Minneapolis police who insisted this be a no-knock warrant. The mayor here has issued an immediate moratorium on all no-knock warrants in the wake of all this.
Turn now to a state of emergency declared north of the border as protests against COVID restrictions escalate. A so-called freedom convoy in Ottawa is causing chaos in the city, blocking the roads. Gio Benitez joins us now with the latest. Good morning, Gio.
Hey, Robin, good morning to you. Those protesters are comparing vaccine mandates to fascism. Now this morning, Ottawa's mayor is calling this the city's most serious emergency. This morning, the mayor of Ottawa declaring a state of emergency in response to more than a week of truckers protesting against COVID restrictions. The mayor saying the protests pose a threat to public safety. The city center shut down with trucks blocking roads.
The city is under siege. This is a threat to our democracy. It is a nationwide insurrection. This is madness.
It began when thousands of long-haul truckers descended upon the city, angry about a federal mandate requiring them to be vaccinated to cross into the United States.
We are not in China. We are not in Cuba. This is a free country.
Authorities say at least 500 truckers refused to leave.
This is not a police-only, City of Ottawa-only challenge. It is, in fact, a national challenge.
And now we're learning the protests have spread to Vancouver, where demonstrators allegedly spread nails across roads. TJ, we will keep following this.
We know you will, Gio. Thank you, as always. We're talking Winter Olympics, and our Maggie Rulli, she's live in the mountains of China. And Maggie, we've got some action, we've got some obstacles for you to tell us about. Hey there.
Hey, TJ. Yeah, it's been a huge day of anticipation up here in the mountains. You mentioned those obstacles, though. Team USA, we hit some setbacks on the slopes, but don't worry, because Team Figure Skating came through with a silver medal.
It was a rough start for Team USA on the slopes. Michaela Schifrin looking to defend Olympic gold in her best event, the giant slalom, skiing off course just 5 gates in. On Instagram, chalking the error up to really bad timing, adding that she's moving on to focus on her next event. And Nina O'Brien suffering a terrible crash during her second run right before the finish line, remaining motionless for several minutes before being carried away by a stretcher. Also a disappointing day for defending slopestyle gold medalist Red Gerard, edged off the podium in a 4th place finish. But on the final night in the team figure skating competition, Team USA dazzling on the ice. Madison Chalk and Evan Bates with a mesmerizing performance in the free dance, boosting Team USA to a silver medal. But a potential setback for team member Vincent Zhou, testing positive for COVID after his free skate performance for the team. He's now waiting on an additional test to confirm. It was a history-making night on ice for 15-year-old Kamila Valieva from the Russian Olympic Committee, becoming the first woman to land a quad in the Olympics. More good news for Team USA. Bobsledder Alana Myers-Taylor finally testing negative for COVID. We caught up with her just moments before she left isolation.
What did you think when you finally got the second negative test?
I was overwhelmed. I definitely cried when I got the news. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it out of.
3-time Olympian and new mom is now back training for the upcoming monobob.
I think the biggest thing is how I look at it. If I think it's going to have an effect on my training, it will. And I don't think it'll have effect.
Guys, we are so thrilled for Alana. She is such a joy. And there's some more good news for Team USA. It's a big opportunity this week for them. In a few days, Michaela Schifrin gets another chance on the slopes with another medal opportunity coming up. Guys.
Maggie, it's amazing to hear them celebrating medals and celebrating negative COVID tests. That's just what these games are right now. But we're looking forward to seeing Nathan Chen, the figure skater. When is he going to be back in action?
Well, soon, in just a few hours, TJ. This is really exciting. Nathan Chen's arguably his biggest event. He's a favorite to win gold in the men's short program for figure skating. But you mentioned those negative COVID tests. This is, again, hanging over this event, TJ. Vincent Zhou, his teammate, tested positive for COVID. And while we're waiting for his second test to confirm it, you guys can just imagine the stress going through Nathan's head right now. Hours to go until that big event. And now he's worried being a close contact to his teammate. So definitely hanging over him. But I have to say, Nathan, we saw him give a similar short performance for the team event. It was incredible. It was his best ever. So we're rooting for him and cannot wait to see him out on the ice.
Waiting for test results.
You're doing a great job, Maggie. Thank you so much for being there. Now to the Olympics and one athlete's balancing act. American-born free skier Eileen Gu is aiming to make trips to the podium in Beijing. And if she wins gold, it's China's national anthem that will be played. Let's go back to Maggie in China. Maggie, we know that she took her first step toward a medal last night.
Yeah, Robin, exactly. Eileen's on her way to the finals in big air freestyle skiing. But, you know, Robin, even before the Olympics, she was already a household name here in China. Her face is plastered on billboards all over the country. And state media even calls her a snow princess who's set to big win here in the host country.
This morning, one of the most dominant women in free ski, Olympian Eileen Gu, facing a rough run in her first competition at the Winter Olympics. The 18-year-old, who was born and raised in California and competed for the U.S. for years, is currently facing controversy after choosing to compete for China, her mother's homeland, instead. Writing on Instagram in 2019, "This was an incredibly tough decision for me to make. I am proud of my heritage and equally proud of my American upbringings. The opportunity to help inspire millions of people where my mom was born during the 2022 Beijing Olympic Winter Games is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help to promote the sport I love." Her decisions coming under scrutiny after the U.S. announced a diplomatic boycott on these games over China's human rights record.
Fans, or maybe once fans, were accusing her of allowing herself to be used as a political tool by the Chinese government, to doing this for financial gain, and then for supporting a country with a really questionable human rights history, for supporting a country that is waging a genocide.
According to Chinese law, no one can hold dual citizenship, and it remains unclear if the San Francisco native has relinquished her American passport.
She seems to still be very confident in the decision that she's made.
Gu isn't the only athlete making a switch. New York native Sarah Escobar will represent Ecuador in women's alpine skiing, becoming the first female winter athlete to do so in the country's history.
It's not unusual for an athlete to make the decision to compete for another country. I think if Eileen had made the decision to compete for a different country, we might not be here having the same conversation.
And guys, while switching citizenship is actually quite common in sport, Eileen is so high profile, the spotlight remains right on her. And with already at least 23 sponsorships to her name, it is not going anywhere anytime soon. Guys.
23 sponsorships already. All right, Maggie, thanks so much.
The latest now on the death of a Navy SEAL candidate, which is putting a spotlight on the grueling training session known as Hell Week. Another SEAL trainee is also hospitalized. Our chief global affairs anchor, Martha Raddatz, is tracking the investigation. Good morning, Martha.
Good morning, George. Military training can be dangerous and deadly. Jets crash, parachutes collide. But to have a trainee die and another hospitalized after physical exertion is something that should be thoroughly investigated. It's called Hell Week, and for good reason, designed to push Navy SEAL candidates to their physical and mental limits. But this morning, 24-year-old Kyle Mullen, seen in these LinkedIn and Yale photos, is dead, and another SEAL candidate hospitalized after the grueling 120-hour week of extreme testing.
I think 4 or 5 hours of sleep the entire week. You're in the ocean incessantly, so you experience hypothermia. You're on your feet, you're running, you're carrying boats, you're in the water.
The cause of death has not yet been determined, but the Navy says the 2 SEAL candidates were taken to the hospital several hours after their basic underwater demolition SEAL class, known as BUDS, successfully completing Hell Week, which is considered the most punishing part of the 6-month-long Navy SEAL assessment. While the SEAL candidates are supposed to receive constant medical screenings throughout Hell Week, Mullen's death is the 4th in SEAL selection since 2001.
At the end of the day, we need to produce the type of young men we need for the job. But at the end of the day, we're also, more importantly, focused on everyone's safety.
While there can always be a previously unknown medical problem that is found in an individual, having Mullen die and another trainee hospitalized at the same time raises all kinds of red flags and will be heavily scrutinized. Robin?
It certainly will. Martha, thank you. Now to the allegations of racial discrimination in the NFL as former coach Brian Flores escalates his battle with the league. His former team, the Miami Dolphins, hiring his replacement overnight. Will Reed has the latest. Good morning, Will.
Good morning, Robin. Of the 9 NFL head coaching vacancies this offseason, 6 have been filled by white men and now 1 by Mike McDaniel, who is biracial. In a league-wide memo this weekend, Commissioner Roger Goodell said the league is committed to improving on issues of diversity and inclusion, but Flores' lawyers say they're not sure they're buying it.
This morning, the Miami Dolphins hiring Mike McDaniel as their new head coach. The 38-year-old replacing Brian Flores, who is suing the league for racial discrimination after being fired by Miami.
Until Mike McDaniel's hiring on Sunday, Mike Tomlin was the only coach of color. And will they actually see this as something that they need to change? I don't know.
McDaniel, who is biracial, joins the Pittsburgh Steelers' Mike Tomlin as the only two black head coaches in the 32-team league.
Touchdown, Miami!
The new hire by the Dolphins coming as lawyers for Flores escalate their battle against the NFL and Commissioner Roger Goodell. Flores is suing the league for what he calls racist hiring practices, alleging that minority candidates aren't given the same consideration as their white counterparts for prestigious coaching and managerial jobs. Last week, the NFL called the claims in that bombshell suit without merit. But on Saturday, Commissioner Goodell sent a league-wide memo calling the lack of diversity among head coaches unacceptable, adding the NFL will reevaluate and examine all policies, guidelines, and initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, saying racism and any form of discrimination is contrary to the league's values.
Flores' lawyers dismissed the memo as, quote, a positive first step, but suspect it is more of a public relations ploy than real commitment to change, going on to accuse the NFL of letting systemic racial bias fester in its front offices for years. Guys.
All right, well, thank you.
Surprise from Queen Elizabeth, announcing that when Charles becomes king, his wife Camilla will be known as Queen Consort. James Longman is live at Buckingham Palace with the details. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, George. 70 years on the throne for Queen Elizabeth. What an achievement. And she's marked the occasion by looking to the future. She said that when her son Charles becomes king, his wife Camilla will be known as Queen. After all the drama of the Diana years, this is quite a moment.
In more than 1,000 years of kings and queens, no other has ever reached this milestone. Queen Elizabeth, now the longest reigning British monarch, at 70 years on the throne. She's seen a lot. When she became queen in 1952, Mount Everest had still not been summited. Hawaii and Alaska weren't yet US states. But on this jubilee, the Queen is making more history, saying that Camilla should be styled as Queen when her son Charles becomes king. In a statement, she said, I am fortunate to have had the steadfast and loving support of my family. I was blessed that in Prince Philip I had a partner willing to carry out the role of consort and unselfishly make the sacrifices that go with it.
She wants everything to be clear and she wants everything to be organised for when the moment comes.
This is something of a formality. In UK law, the wife of a king is always a queen consort. But after all the drama of the Diana years, many wondered just how Camilla would fit into the firm. She's now technically the Princess of Wales, but she doesn't use that title out of respect for Diana and goes by the Duchess of Cornwall instead. Elizabeth's intervention now puts an end to any doubt about her future title alongside Charles. A statement from the couple saying he and the Duchess of Cornwall are touched and honoured by Her Majesty's words. A royal source has told ABC News Prince William, the Duke of Cambridge, is also happy with the Queen's decision. It's taken 17 years to get to this point. When Charles married Camilla in 2005, the palace had said she'd be known as Princess Consort, alongside a future King Charles. She was his unpopular mistress, who the public felt had destroyed a royal marriage. But over time, Camilla's star has risen. She's known for her dry wit. She's taken a particular interest in charities that support the elderly, victims of domestic violence and literacy. And importantly, she's been an important, steadfast companion to the man who will one day be king.
So, when the time comes for Charles to be king, we'll likely have a double coronation. We haven't had one of those since all the way back in 1937. But that is not happening anytime soon. The Queen is still very much hard at work. George.
James Longman, thanks. Let's bring in our royal analyst, Victoria Murphy. Victoria, thanks for joining us again this morning. Start out with some definitions. What's the difference between Queen Consort and Queen?
Hi there, good morning, George. Well, there's a very important difference because at the moment we have Queen Elizabeth, who is a sovereign monarch. She is our head of state and she is a queen. However, her husband was called a prince because if he had been called a king, then he would have been seen to outrank her. But when a king is crowned as a sovereign and a monarch, as Prince Charles will be, then his wife can be crowned alongside him as a queen. And she will be called a queen consort. Now, her official title is queen consort, but normally we would just drop the consort in everyday speak and refer to her as queen. So in the future we will have Queen Camilla, and after that we will have Queen Kate or Queen Catherine, as she will be known, but they will not hold the same positions within our constitution as our current queen does.
As James noted, this is a change from what was expected. Prince Charles has always said she would be known as Princess Consort.
This is a huge change, George, and when they were married in 2005, things were very different. One of the reasons that they got the marriage over the line with the public was by saying that Camilla would not be called Queen. She would instead go by this downgraded title of Princess Consort. But they never changed the law, so legally she would always have been Queen. And I think it's been very clear to everyone for a very long time that Charles has always wanted her to be crowned alongside him as his Queen. The royal family have been reading the public mood on this for a long time, I think. Polls show that her popularity has grown, and I think clearly there was a feeling that they felt that they could get Queen Camilla over the line at this stage. However, in order to do that, there needed to be some kind of statement, because they'd previously said so many times that she would be Princess Consort. So that is what this statement from the Queen has now done. It sealed the deal on Queen Camilla.
Thanks, Robin.
But it does appear that way.
Yeah, it does.
Because in the beginning, because of Princess Diana, there was
a little bit of a chill.
I know, but not so much anymore. All right.
Now with podcast star Joe Rogan under fire again, this time a video going viral. It shows him using a racial slur repeatedly on his show. Janae Norman here with more on this. Janae, he's apologized, and now we're hearing from Spotify.
Right, so guys, get this. Some 381 million people listen to Spotify. This scandal is costing the company big bucks, millions in market value. In a lengthy memo to staff, the company's CEO now apologizing to employees on the heels of Rogan issuing his own apology. Overnight, Spotify addressing the firestorm surrounding one of its biggest stars, making it clear podcast host Joe Rogan isn't going anywhere. In an internal memo to staff obtained by ABC News, CEO Daniel Ek apologizing, writing he's deeply sorry for the controversy over Rogan, but adding, I do not believe that silencing Joe is the answer. Canceling voices is a slippery slope. This following the embattled podcast star's own apology issued over the weekend.
I'm making this video to talk about the most regretful and shameful thing that I've ever had to talk about publicly.
A recently surfaced and now viral video shows him using a racial slur repeatedly on his shows over the years.
I know that to most people, there's no context where a white person is ever allowed to say that word, never mind publicly on a podcast. And I agree with that now. I haven't said it in years.
Spotify also confirming after conversations with Rogan, they removed dozens of episodes of his hit show, The Joe Rogan Experience, the streaming site's most popular podcast. Rogan reportedly signing a $100 million exclusive licensing deal with the streaming giant in 2020. It really just depends on whatever feels good in my soul. Grammy Award-winning singer-songwriter India Arie asking for her music and podcast to be removed from the platform, though she says the Joe Rogan controversy is just the final straw.
I am in no position to tell Spotify not to have Joe Rogan. I don't believe in cancel culture. I didn't even call Joe Rogan a racist. What I said was, I don't like it, take me off. But mostly this is a conversation about me standing up for my dignity. Because how far can it go before somebody is like, all right, I'm tired now.
Arie joining a growing number of megastars pulling their music from the platform to protest Rogan's promotion of vaccine misinformation, including Neil Young
Gonna sing an old song to you right now.
And Joni Mitchell.
They paved paradise, put up a parking lot.
In response, Spotify CEO announcing they would add content advisories to COVID podcasts and direct listeners to a hub with factual information.
Now, there are ways of dealing with controversies like this in the past and recently have been very awkward. Clearly, Spotify has to address this in some way. It's problematic and it's going to catch up.
And when I spoke to India Arie last night, she said that asking for her music to be taken down from Spotify has turned into a bigger conversation with the company now wanting to talk to her, which she says is huge and a potential next step in moving forward.
The dialogue, the conversation.
Exactly.
That is so
it's
very
getting
necessary.
Started.
Yeah, India Arie. Get it done.
She was great.
She is.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Back now with our play of the day, and I mentioned this guy is the Tom Brady of surfing, but you could also call Tom Brady the Kelly Slater of football. Kelly Slater is a surfing legend, and this is what he has done, folks. He just picked up another championship, another title here at the Billabong Pro Pipeline in Hawaii. He's doing this just days short of his 50th birthday. He has won 11 world titles. He doesn't know if he'll continue through the whole season, but he says he's kind of on a final tour here for some of the fans. And this is an embrace out there with a guy half his age that he just beat. He says if he's going to retire from surfing, his plans, do some surfing. In his retirement. So,
but look how you said if he does go out all this year, he's doing it for the fans.
Yes.
He wants to do it for the fans.
Yes, it is. So congrats. Later.
Now to the F-35 fighter jet that crashed last month while trying to land on an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea. The pilot safely ejected. The Pentagon now confirming video leaked online shows the moment of impact. Our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, joins us now with more on this. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Robin. For 2 weeks now, that F-35 crash has been shrouded in mystery, but now we're seeing it from the point of view of cameras on board that aircraft carrier itself, how violently that fighter jet slammed into the deck, burst into flame, and then skidded off into the ocean.
This morning, the moment that F-35 stealth fighter jet, the most sophisticated aircraft ever built, slams into an aircraft carrier in the South China Sea.
What you see as the airplane gets close to landing on the aircraft carrier is that there's a big settle, and you can see that it's losing energy and it's dropping very quickly. Something in here is going wrong.
It's a clear day, and suddenly you hear the landing safety officer begin screaming. The left wing hits the deck, then the nose. Another angle shows it bursting into flame before splashing into the South China Sea, which is claimed by China. This leak comes after another video shows the plane during its approach, and a photo of its wreckage sinking just off the USS Carl Vinson's bow were leaked last month. The pilot who ejected was among 7 sailors injured. The Navy says it has begun efforts to salvage the $100 million plane and the priceless technology on board.
Analysts tell us that given where that F-35 went down in the South China Sea, it is possible for the Navy to salvage it. The Navy tells us it's now investigating both the cause of the crash and the leak of that video. Robin.
And again, we want to let people know that the pilot was able to eject. Thank you so much, Matt.
It's hard to imagine a day where kids aren't wearing masks in school. Well, that day could be coming soon to New Jersey. The governor there, Phil Murphy, is expected to announce that the state will lift its school mask mandate. Our Gio Benitez is back with more on this. Gio, good morning.
Hey, TJ, good morning again. Yeah, the governor is expected to make that announcement later today at 1 o'clock this afternoon. The governor saying that the new policy will take effect the second week of March, no longer requiring students or employees to wear a mask. Of course, there has been a nationwide debate on this, but this appears to be a deliberate move to treat COVID as part of daily life. Now, the governors of Pennsylvania made the same announcement last month. And of course, the governors of New York and Connecticut, they actually said that last week that they are reevaluating their own policies. So we will be watching that, guys.
We shall see. All right, Gio, thank you so much.